I was not planning on revisiting She-Hulk. I watched the first episode, it sucked. I did a 5-minute opening segment review on it, and at that point I was happy to forget about the big green bitch. But then, the past few days, I start seeing all these twerking She-Hulk videos popping up all over YouTube, and I said, no. They didn't actually have her twerk. That cannot possibly be real. I know modern feminism is pretty incoherent in its principles and philosophy these days, but they can't have actually done that. And so, just like the annoying rubbernecker who slows down to get a good look at the 7-car pileup on the other side of the highway, my curiosity was piqued. I had to see this for myself. So after fortifying myself with a beer or 5, I sat down and watched She-Hulk Episode 3, the title of which I believe is How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Twerk the Night Away. Now, for a quick refresher, She-Hulk is a show that is intended by its creators to be a celebration of the joys of being a single 40-year-old borderline alcoholic career woman who don't need no man like a fish don't need no bicycle. And I think there's another quick refresher that's in order here, specifically a refresher on what twerking actually is. And I will put this as chivalrously as I can for the benefit of our lady viewers, but twerking is a form of dance that simulates, in an exaggerated fashion, the movements that a woman makes when a man has mounted her from behind. Or to put it another way, it is a dance whose whole purpose is to celebrate the most male-dominant form of sexual congress. Which makes it a strange thing to have a character do whom you were trying to establish as some icon of independent female empowerment. But it's actually worse than all that, for it turns out that the scene in question is a twerking duet in which She-Hulk is joined by some pop star who named herself after a male horse, whose biggest hit song is about how men really enjoy copulating with her because she has an unusually moist vagina. A song I only ever heard of because Ben Shapiro famously read out the lyrics live on his show one day. And yes, I said pop star because I don't know whether it's correct to call her a singer or a rapper, because it sounds to my untrained ear like she just makes a bunch of random sex noises into the microphone. So I will gladly leave that distinction to the professional musicologists. In summation, the creators of She-Hulk, this character they're trying to position as some sort of banner carrier for congenitally unhappy, unmarried, middle-aged women everywhere, decided there would be no better way to establish her feminist street cred than by having her do a male domination sex dance alongside a woman who sings songs about why her pussy juice is the most worthwhile thing about her. So much female empowerment, my poor little heart can hardly take it. So, could you make this stuff up if you tried? Spoiler alert, no you couldn't. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where our women can chop wood and bend steel with their vaginas. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. Happy Saturday. Happy Labor Day weekend. Sorry I missed you last night. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. We talked on Wednesday about how Tuesday's speech in Wilkes-Barre, PA, was the most ridiculous speech of President and semi-animated cadaver Joe Biden's entire half-century-long career in national politics. A career that has no shortage of ridiculous speeches. And he followed that up, as we expected he might, with a primetime address at Independence Hall in Philadelphia on Thursday night that was beyond an inkling of a shadow of a vestige of a hair of a doubt. The most disturbing, most angry, most mean-spirited, most horrifyingly un-American speech ever delivered by any U.S. president. And we need to talk first about the abuse of the format and the venue. For in all the post-game analysis of this thing that has gone on, that's what I have heard talked about the least. The first time a president ever went to the TV networks and requested a broadcast slot in prime time, it was John F. Kennedy. And the occasion was the Cuban Missile Crisis. In other words, a president speaking to the nation on television was an unprecedented thing, and they took that step in October of 1962 because the president had information that he needed to urgently disseminate to as much of the population as he could and as quickly as possible. The Soviet Union, they've been placing medium-range nuclear missiles in Cuba. They are close to being operational. If they were to be launched, much of the southeastern United States would be obliterated before we could even raise the alarm. So first, Kennedy lays out the nature of the threat that's facing the nation. Then he explains the posture of his government. And everybody knows this quote: "It shall be the policy of this nation that any missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere is an attack by the Soviet Union upon the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union." Which is to say, when John Kennedy decided to schedule a primetime presidential address, it was so he could inform the country that the Third World War might be imminent and millions of them could be dead within a matter of hours or days. It was not because he felt like spending 42 minutes bitching about what a bunch of assholes the guys in the opposition party are. But then Joe Biden is no Jack Kennedy. We have never seen a speech anything like this in the venue of a primetime presidential TV address. It's always been taken for granted that when a president asks the networks for airtime, it's because there is urgent information that he needs to impart to the citizenry. Now, there have been certain departures from time to time. LBJ gave primetime addresses on Vietnam and the Civil Rights Act. Nixon also gave a couple of them on Vietnam. Ford used a primetime address to say he was going to pardon Nixon. Carter used a primetime address to inform the country about the taking of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Reagan used them to announce the invasion of Grenada and the airstrikes on Libya. The first George Bush gave one when we invaded Panama. Clinton gave one the evening of the Oklahoma City bombing. The second George Bush gave one the evening of 9/11 and at the start of the Iraq War. Obama used one to announce that Osama bin Laden had been liquidated. Trump used one to announce the killing of Soleimani. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. He died like a scared little baby. I love me some Donald Trump. But it wasn't until Joe Biden stumbled onto the scene that we saw a president, on the grounds of a national park no less, standing before the birthplace of American democracy itself, use the venue of a primetime televised address to the nation to launch a series of political broadsides on the opposition party. And that is literally what all this speech was. He repeated the phrase MAGA Republicans 31 times. And don't quote me on that number. I may have lost count toward the end, so it may be higher than that. Because the whole thrust of this speech was the idea that a MAGA Republican is the absolute worst kind of person you can be. If you're a MAGA Republican, you are a dangerous extremist by definition. If you want your country to be great, well, obviously you're an extremist. If you want sovereign borders, you're an extremist. If you want schools that don't have sex-pervert teachers who want to hack off your son's testicles, you're an extremist. If you want energy independence, you're an extremist. If you think the United States is the greatest force for good in the history of the world, you're an extremist. If you object to face diapers and vax mandates, you're an extremist. If you don't wish to celebrate other people's sex lives, you're an extremist. If you love your family or your church more than you love the government, you're an extremist. First base, Bugs Bunny. Left field, Bugs Bunny. Shortstop, Bugs Bunny. You know what else I haven't heard mentioned in any of the analysis of this speech? The potential legal liability of the TV networks for having broadcast it. Part of the reason why it's always been mutually understood that the president won't use the venue of a primetime address for partisan attacks is because the networks are not allowed to give out free political advertising. But that is exactly what this was. This was the president asking the networks for free airtime and using that airtime to attack the opposition party 2 months before a midterm election. And by broadcasting a speech like that and not giving an equal amount of free airtime to the Republicans to rebut what the president said, the networks have now committed a clear and obvious violation of the Broadcast Decency Act. So how come there are no Republicans demanding investigations and indictments? Because there should be. But I guess deep at heart, the Republicans will always be a bunch of gutless yellow turds. It wasn't just classless and unpresidential for Biden to give this speech. It was against the law. Presidents cannot do things like that. Presidents are not above the law, to borrow a phrase from our leftist friends. You can't use free network airtime as a venue for naked political attacks. Donald Trump said a lot of inappropriate things when he was in office. A lot of unpresidential things, and yes, there were occasions from time to time when he would attack the Democrats and the fake news media during speeches and occasions when it was not appropriate for him to be doing so. But using a primetime televised address to the nation for that purpose? Trump would never do a thing like that. Not even on his most Trumpian day would he do that. Remember when Joe Biden was the return to normalcy candidate? Remember when he was going to be the kindly old grandfather to the nation? He was going to lower the temperature, restore civility, bring back respect for our institutions. You don't need me to tell you how all of that worked out. Far from a pragmatic, moderate centrist, we have gotten the most radical, most divisive administration probably in the history of the country. I think first-term FDR is still in the race, but it is a close one. So it's been quite the journey for Joe Biden, from bipartisan dealmaker to hard-left partisan bomb thrower. And Thursday night in Philadelphia, he matriculated all the way up to Mouth of Sauron. I know there's a lot of people saying the iconography of this thing was akin to the Nuremberg rallies or General Hux's speech at Starkiller Base in Star Wars Episode 7. But when I saw the vertically oriented photograph, which I'm totally going to use for the thumbnail, where everything is bathed in red light and the circular window in the bell tower is visible, I actually exclaimed out loud, "Holy shit, he is the Mouth of Sauron." Seriously, if you were consciously attempting to compose a photograph to make Joe Biden look like the Mouth of Sauron, it would be this photograph. It's so uncanny, it's difficult to believe it wasn't done on purpose. Also, using uniformed personnel from the armed forces as background props for a political attack speech is a pretty auspicious feat of scumbaggery as well. But then, the next time Joe Biden's administration shows any compunction about politicizing the military will be the first time. So that's probably another one for the shocking but not surprising file. As far as the actual language in the speech, let's just call things what they are. These are the sorts of speeches that leaders give right before they are about to start rounding up political dissidents and putting them in re-education camps. I personally have never heard an American president talk that way, be it in a primetime address or any other occasion. Really, presidents don't talk like that. Even Joe Biden seemed shocked on Friday when his own words were read back to him. And that's got to be one of my absolute favorite things about late period Geritol Joe, when his own words are being read back to him and he gets this look on his face like, what kind of crazy person would say that? It's clear that he doesn't read his speeches ahead of time. It's clear that he doesn't comprehend the words on the screen as he's reading them. So by the time it was Friday morning, he probably didn't recall a single word that he had said on Thursday night. So Peter Doocy reads out the quote in which he says very plainly, "All MAGA Republicans are a threat to democracy." And then Joe says with a straight face, "Well, I don't think Trump supporters are a threat to democracy. I would never say a thing like that." The nuclear codes, ladies and gentlemen. This man is in possession of the nuclear codes. The Mouth of Sauron, now with hair plugs and dentures. And of course, in the final analysis, the overarching theme of this speech was one of desperation. When the party that has controlled all the organs of government for 2 years only wants to talk about how awful and dangerous the guys on the other side are, that is a very powerful statement by omission. When your party is in charge and deserves to be returned to power, its leaders normally talk about the long list of things they have accomplished during their time in power. The Democrats are not doing that. They just want to bellow about the bad orange man and his dangerous rabble of supporters. And when I say this is the sort of language that normally precedes roundups and prison camps, it's easy to scoff and hand-wave it away and say nothing like that would ever happen in the United States, but just how dependable is that rationale today in the year 2022? Certainly not as dependable as it once was. For can't we all make a fairly long list of things we have witnessed within the past 5 years that we thought could never happen in the United States? I think our political aristocracy will do absolutely anything to keep Donald Trump from being returned to the White House. If it means cooking up a fake indictment in hopes of keeping him off the ballot, they will do it. If it means preventing him from taking office after he wins the election fair and square, they will do it. And if it means rounding up Trump supporters and packing them off to internment camps, Does anybody really think they wouldn't do it? If they saw that as their last avenue for retaining power, of course they would do it. As we often talk about, these are people who have lost the whole concept of limiting principles. They are incapable of restraint. They do not wish to live in a pluralistic democracy where their opponents sometimes win the election. They do not care how many people's lives and livelihoods have to get sacrificed on the altar of their pathological hubris. They only want power. Power is their religion. If they can't rule and rule permanently, they would rather die. But Joe wants you to understand he doesn't hate all Republicans. In fact, there are some Republicans he really likes, specifically the ones who always vote with the Democrats, who never speak in opposition to any Democrat policy, who stand there and smile politely as the country gets dragged farther and farther off the cliff of woke leftist insanity. Those are the kind of Republicans Joe Biden can work with. Why can't all Republicans just be like Adam Kinzinger and Willard Romney? Wouldn't things be so lovely then? We could all go on CNN and sing Kumbaya together as we all celebrate the bill signing ceremony for the new federal holiday of Transgender Day. I'm sure Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson will be invited to that ceremony. He's a Republican who says his small government conservative principles make him disinclined to interfere with parents and doctors who want to hack off the body parts of minor children. Kristi Noem of South Dakota, too. She'll be there for sure. She talks a real tough game right up until someone threatens to call her a transphobic. Then it's like, oh, let me grab the scalpel for you, doctor. I guess she thinks that if she goes on Sean Hannity's show a whole lot of times and talks tough about immigration, nobody will remember she always rolls over for the transgender lobby. Dr. Oz, too. Another very frequent Hannity guest who was totally down with all the transgender stuff, right up until he decided to run for the Senate as a Republican 5 minutes ago. But it's like I always say, there will always be a regrettably large chunk of the Republican Party leadership for whom conservatism just means maintaining a certain distance between yourself and the craziest radical leftists. And when you point out to such people that you do know you are to the left of where Barack Obama was in 2008, don't you? They look at you like you've got a penis growing out of your forehead, like they have never heard something so offensive. Well, I am a rock-ribbed conservative, they grumble. Who are you to question my conservative credentials? Have you noticed how often I self-apply the word conservative? I call myself conservative at least 6 times a day. And have you heard how often I name-check Ronald Reagan and William F. Buckley? You know, come to think of it, if you said all that stuff in a fake Latina accent, you would sound exactly like Ana Navarro. And that's just about all I have got for this belated Friday episode that I'm doing on a Saturday. And I've got my first ever live stream coming up tomorrow, 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern. Feel free to tune in. You never know what might happen. Though I do pledge not to take my clothes off. Sorry, ladies. Until then, have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply all the usual stuff. And please do kindly get the hell off my lawn.